Hi, Martin.
Hi.
How you doing?
How are you?
Yeah, good to see you.
Very well, thanks, Paul. Yeah, good to see you too.
Excellent. Also, we've been keeping up a little bit, you and I, like this, and meeting outside when we've been able to catch up as well. So it's been a strange old year, hasn't it? Obviously, what's been going on, and I've known you for a couple of years now, and got to know you for the networking, find about your experience and career in the drinks trade. So how are you? How are you feeling right now as the year's gone on?
Well, at the beginning of all this, I found it quite a shock to the system, as I guess everybody else did, because I had a very active retired social life. I was out virtually every day and a lot of evenings, retired lunches, dinners, lots of other things. And then suddenly overnight all stopped, and it was quite traumatic. But once things settled down, I realised I'm actually quite well off compared to many people, being retired, having enough money for a modest retirement. I won't say I live in the lap of luxury, but I don't have the stress that I used to have, and indeed so many people have at the moment. So basically, I'm a happy bunny.
Excellent. Well, it's good to hear. And it's been good for things like this for us to be able to keep in touch as a substitute until we can obviously meet up again in person soon. Looking forward to that. So this year I've chatted to loads of different people at different stages of their career, and say now you've sort of retired, but you've had a wonderful career in the drinks trade. And obviously we'll elaborate a little bit more about what we're going to be collaborating on, an exciting project together, which people can enjoy in their homes. So you've obviously been lots of different roles over the year in the drinks trade, past Southwest Chairman, the UK Bartenders Guild. You've lived in Sri Lanka. So let's go back to the start. How did you get into the drinks trade?
Well, I was going to say, drink has been my passion. I will state at this stage, my whole life's been about quality rather than quantity. I'm very aware of the evils of drink because I've seen people who've become alcoholics. So I want to stress this at the outset, that everything I do, it's in moderation. But my path really started in my teens. I was 16, and I remember very clearly, it's one of the events that stuck in my mind. My mother gave me a glass of Puy Fuise on my birthday. It was a classic white Burgundy. In an age where most of our contemporaries, including my parents' contemporaries, were drinking very sweet Rieslings, and you'll remember Blue Nun and Matthias and wines like that. That was generally what people drank. People didn't drink dry white wines in those days. So that really started me off. I loved it and studied, in a colloquial sense, a lot more about wine. And it all started with wine, really, before the spirits. I suppose the next thing was when I was 20, my father had died, and I went with my mother to Scotland and sampled my first malt whiskey. That was exactly 50 odd years ago. It was 50 years ago, and we went to Glenfiddich. In those days, they didn't have visitor centres. We were taken round by one of the directors and had the most amazing lunch afterwards with salmon that was caught that morning. And that's where my love of the malt whiskey started. So it goes back a long way. Again, malt whiskey wasn't fashionable in England then. People forget this. It's a very recent development. Us Sassenachs used to drink a lot of blended whiskey. Malt whiskey traditionally was quite a harsh drink, much beloved by Highlanders out in the cold and the wet. But I started these paths, which all came together much later in my life, at a very young age. When I was 24, my girlfriend gave me a book for my birthday. It was a book called Wine by Hugh Johnson, who many people know. He publishes every year the Pocket Wine Book, which is the biggest selling wine book in the world by far. But his first book, Wine, was quite a big tome, and I studied it from cover to cover, and I was enthralled. And that was a landmark. So much so that we had no internet in those days. I didn't know anybody who knew anything about wine. So I looked up the London telephone directory, and I found two entries on the wine which fascinated me. One was the Wine Society, and the other was the Wine Spirit Education Trust. I joined both that year. I did my first wine qualification in 1973, the Wine and Spirit certificate, as it was called. I was the only person outside the trade. You were supposed to be in the trade. At the time, I worked for Save and Prosper, which was a unit trust management company, and I had to state on the form what my trade relationship to wine was. So I said, well, I have to advise people on investment, which wasn't strictly true. I did work for an investment company. So I said, wine is a form of investment. I want to know a bit more about it. And that's all they wanted. They just wanted to tick the box. Because in those days, most of the wine companies were owned by brewers. And the brewers supported the education in those days. In those days, it lost money, the wine education thing. It had to be heavily subsidized. Now, from being one of the very early students, only started in 1969, and this is 73, they're now the biggest wine education organization in the world with over 100,000 graduates a year.
Wow.
So I saw the whole development of the wine trade and the spirit trade, and indeed the cocktail trade, from my earliest years to today. So the last 50 years, for me, have been a fascinating journey to see the evolution.
Excellent. That's, obviously that passion still comes across now. Your love of drinks and educating people, allowing people to try drinks in their homes, etc. And I remember when I tried a malt whiskey in Edinburgh, and I think it was in the Balmoral, and it was about £25 for a nice one. But really, it's the experience, as you say, it's experienced and really enjoying and savouring the drinks, isn't it? It's part of it.
Well, it is. Part of the reason for me changing what I drink is cost, because malt whiskey, when I was young, was very cheap. Very few people wanted it. And I used to drink the most amazing whiskies. Nowadays, the whiskies that I used to love then, I can't afford them now. They've gone way beyond my pocket. But that's partly because it's become a worldwide phenomenon. Although to some extent it's declined in China, the Chinese were buying up vast quantities of the top end wines and spirits, and not necessarily because they like them. It was a fashion statement. If you were drinking a really expensive whiskey, you were drinking Remy Louis XIII, which I remember as being £1,000 a bottle. It's probably more than that now. Yeah. It's got a very distinct Baccarat decanter. You would have that in the bar with a label on it. That was your bottle. So when your guests came into the bar or the restaurant, that's what you served them. That's part of your status. And that probably does still exist in China today. But the Chinese government stamped down a lot of corruption. So that had an effect. But nevertheless, the Chinese and the Japanese started to drink very expensive products, which made it more impossible for people like me to afford them anymore. It just pushed the price right up. We can talk about that at some time in the future, but you don't very often now see age statements on whiskey bottles. It's mainly just a name like signature, because the moment you put an age on that whiskey, that's the minimum age of the whiskey in the blend. Because all malt whiskies, apart from a handful called single cask whiskey, all malt whiskies are blended as well. There's a lot of misuse of the term blended, which I can go into further either now or at some other time. But it's these little things that I want to impart to people. There are lots of sometimes disconnected facts that I've picked up over a lifetime that I'm trying to bring together and make it more interesting for people.
Yeah, so one of the things you mentioned about the change over the last 50 years and being a part of that journey of it is some of the drinks that are very much trending. Like there's been a huge increase in gin, wasn't it? Gin distilleries, and how that market's boomed. And how does that come about that suddenly there's an explosion of a particular area of the drinks market?
It happens in a number of ways. Drink is fashion. Drink is lifestyle. So you generally find that at a particular point in time, it might start with some marketing or advertising, but it could be any number of things that triggers it off. Now, when I was young, and certainly a lot younger, in my early years, my mother would have a bottle of Gordon's gin in the cocktail cabinet. There were only a handful of gins. I hated gin in those days, and most young people did. Gin virtually died out. It was seen as an old people's drink. So why did it come back? Well, I don't really know. I'm not a marketeer. You're more of a marketeer than I am. Things start off because drinks companies start promoting something and it catches on. I think that's a lot of what it's about. So the gin that the vast majority of younger people certainly drink today is nothing like the gin from my youth. The styles change, because we'll talk about that more when we go into detail about gin. But all these drinks have evolved. They're not the same at all in many cases. One of the things about gin is all gins are basically flavoured vodkas, and people don't realise this. They come out the same still, and you decide then what you're going to do with the spirit. So although gin is a very special kind of flavoured vodka, that's all it is. And people don't always understand this. It's like with wine, people say, I don't like Chardonnay. So what wine do you like? Well, I love Chablis. Well, Chablis is 100% Chardonnay. It just doesn't say so on the label.
Yeah.
So, people have preconceptions. And I think a lot of likes and dislikes are what people want to be seen drinking to some extent. I'll give you another example of that. Back in 1980, I visited the sherry region for the first time. And my favourite sherry was Tio Pepe, which is exceptionally dry. Again, it was my mother's favourite, and I acquired the taste. But it wasn't that fashionable in those days, because that was the time when Harvey's Bristol cream was huge, very sweet. So I had this wonderful tasting at Gonzales Beers, who at the time were the most prominent sherry shippers. They're still a huge company. And I asked, again, in those days, it was one of the directors that was taking care of me. I mean, this doesn't happen these days. In those days, you didn't have all the visitor centres, I said, anywhere in the world. So I asked him why Tio Pepe was so popular, because I knew it wasn't to most people's taste. And he said, Martin, it's because people want to be seen drinking it. Mm-hmm. This is very important. It's an image statement that if you are seen to be drinking a pale sherry, and you've ordered, and everybody's heard you've ordered Tio Pepe, you must be sophisticated. But they didn't like it. And very shortly afterwards, there was a new sherry that came on the market called pale cream sherry. Because previously dark sherry was sweet generally, and pale sherry was dry. And the whole thing about pale cream, and there was a major brand, just I remember who it was who had the major brand and still the brand leader. It was conceived for people who wanted to look as though they were drinking dry sherry, but they were actually drinking sweet sherry. I kid you not. This is a marketing thing. And there's a lot of that in the drinks trade. Is all about image. James Bond, the Vesper Martini, which I will come back to, and lots of things like that. It's all about image. It's not necessarily what people like, though we think we like things and we drink what we like. A lot of people drink what gives us a certain image, like your Rolex watch and the Fountain pen, if you have a Mont Blanc pen, all these things are statements about you, and that has a lot of influence. The drinks trade, certainly.
Yeah, I guess when I started going out and drinking, it was the Alco Pops all came out, and that kind of market boom, didn't it, in the 90s? And so now I've learned lots from you already about the drinks trend. I have particularly dark rum, which I like, trying different rums and things. And it's nice. It's nice to try different drinks, find a bit about their heritage, what they're about, the journey they've gone on. Obviously, you've got loads of experience in that, and travel to lots of places to experience these drinks. I wanted to ask you about Sri Lanka, because obviously you live in Sri Lanka and still have friends that obviously you keep in touch with there. How did you end up in Sri Lanka?
Well, it goes back to really the 2000s. Basically, I was self-employed for much of my life, and I was just going through a very tough patch. We had recessions from time to time, and I was always in a market which was aspirational. And one of the first things to go would be what I was doing, because people didn't need to learn about wine and pay a price for it if they were hard up for cash. So I had a customer of mine at this stage, because I was not only educating people on the one hand, but I was making a bit of extra income, wholesaling wines, spirits, and also some food products, which I could go into, but I don't want to be too distracted. Anyway, one of my customers was a Sri Lankan chartered accountant who'd lived in England for many years. And he had made his fortune on petrol stations. Now, people don't realize that the main fuel stations on a motorway will be owned by that company, usually, the big ones. But a lot of the ones in off-centre locations, virtually all of them are franchised out to independent operators. They make very little on the fuel. They make their money on the snacks that they sell and the fact they're open long hours and people are buying all sorts of things apart from fuel. That's where the money's made.
Right.
And he built up a whole chain of these. And he'd invested part of his money into a first one, then a second wine shop. The first one was very near me in St Ives in Cambridgeshire, and the second one was in Cambridge itself. And I happened to be in one of his shops one day, and he said, would I help him develop his wine? So I did. That's how we became great friends. And he said to me one day, Martin, the civil war in Sri Lanka has ended. This would have been about 2009. And he said, why don't you go over to Sri Lanka and start doing your wine education there? He said, they need it very badly, and now is the time. So I thought, well, big step, but I had no ties by this time. I was divorced in 2005. I didn't jump straight in. What I did was I thought about it for about a year and thought I wasn't happy with the way my career was going here. So at that time, there was a lot of help from an organisation which was a combination of the Department of Trade and Industry and the Foreign Office. And they would give subsidies and lots of other help to people that were interested in exporting. And I thought to myself, well, if I start doing the same courses that I'm running in England, but I will get the recognition to run the courses. It's not just running the course. You run the company, which is the training provider, and then you need somebody to deliver the course, the certified educator. Well, I was in the happy position I could do both. So I ran my own training company, but I was my own educator. So integration basically. I didn't have to employ anybody else. So I did the research. Certainly they would give me an accreditation if I went over there. Nobody was running these courses in Sri Lanka at the time. And the Foreign Office and business, I think it was part of Business Link at the time, they gave me lots of input about how to export. And there was a scheme going where if you did a recce, let's say you went to a trade fair to just to get information about how this might work in your proposed location, they would match you pound for pound. So I up to £1,000 a matching. So if you spent 2,000, they give you 1,000 back. So I did some research. There was a hospitality show the very next year in Colombo, in Sri Lanka. So I went over in 2011. And as I say, I was subsidised. I went there for a month. I looked at a lot of how the drinks market worked over there. I had a very good reception over there. I came back, this would have been the middle of the year. I came back, and at the end of the year was the World Travel Market in London. Now, the World Travel Market is where the hoteliers across the globe market their wares. It's the biggest travel show in the world.
Right, okay.
Every country has a national stand. So I went to the show, and I went to the Sri Lankan stand. There were lots of general managers from top hotels over there. So I used it as an opportunity in London to go and talk to lots of the people I wanted to sell to in Sri Lanka. And one of them happened to be the chairman of the Institute of Hospitality for Sri Lanka. And I was a member of the Institute.
Wow.
And he said, Martin, if you come to Sri Lanka, would you be interested in coming onto my National Executive Committee? I think what you're doing is great. So I did. So I hit the ground running when I got to Sri Lanka. So it was after a lot of research. It was wonderful, Paul. A great experience. There were a lot of obstacles along the way, and you don't find that out until you're actually in the market. But it was difficult to make money. The government moved the goalpost 6 months after I was there, and I struggled financially for a lot of the time. But I still would have hung in there. And just as things started to come right, and I had a lot of advanced bookings, I was run over by a motorcyclist. He ran me down from behind. I had a very bad leg injury. Now, if you get a wound in the tropics, it's very serious. I mean, you can die in 3 days and get infected. There was a wonderful surgeon who had trained at the Royal Brompton Hospital who took pity on me and treated me free for 5 months, 3 times a week, and wouldn't take any money. Wow. I couldn't afford his fees, and I couldn't afford the insurance. So that's how I got through. And then I came back to England in 2015. But the Sri Lankan experience was amazing. There was the courses. So I trained a lot of the top Sri Lankan people today, and I can say I trained in wine, and a lot of them were high flyers. In addition to that, the drinks companies began to take notice of me, so I started to do a lot of drinks promotion. I was Mr. Whiskey, so I did all the whiskey tastings on the island. I was the advisor to the High Commissioner on gin and whiskey, which was amazing. So didn't get paid for it, but it was great for the profile. So all his high-end guests used to come along. Even the Foreign Office Minister, what's his name? Bert. He was actually an MP quite close to where I lived. He was there in Sri Lanka, and we met and talked. So I made some exceptionally good contacts and learned a lot about food and wine pairing and whiskey and wine pairing because I was running really high-profile events. So I managed. I wouldn't say I ever made a fortune, but the lifestyle was fantastic. And I wish I was there now at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Nice cold beer on the beach. You can't beat that.
Oh, it sounds you've enjoyed the life and met some interesting characters along the way. And so, when did you move to Somerset?
Well, I came back in 2015. I spent a year in my house. I still had my house. I had a wooden house in the woods near Huntingdon. I've been there about 12 years. again, money was very tight when I came back from Sri Lanka. So I sold the house, rented for a year in Stamford in Lincolnshire, which is the most beautiful town in England. 600 conserved buildings.
Wow.
Turned out, just as an aside, that there was a man who had a single cask whiskey bar with 300 single cask whiskies. His other bar was in Singapore, but his mother and sister lived in Stamford, so he opened the bar. Only lasted a year, but the best whiskey tastings I ever had were in Stamford. Anyway, so that lasted for a year, and then my daughter lives in Wiveliscombe.
Oh yeah.
I was looking to move anyway, and that's how I came to be here. I've got two little granddaughters, 3.5 and 5.5 in Wiveliscombe.
Yeah. And so I got to know you through networking circles. And
It's actually 3 years we've known each other.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
I got networking very quickly when I moved to Taunton.
Because you did quite a bit with FSB, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I hit the ground running. I'm quite good at planning ahead, and I was the treasurer in Stamford, and I was on the regional committee. When I came here, there was an opportunity to become secretary of the Taunton branch. Then they closed the branch. I was already involved heavily with the UK Bartenders Guild. I was on the national committee. When I moved here, they made me Southwest chairman, and then a year later they closed the branch. In the Institute of Hospitality, I started to do a lot of work. Then they closed the branch in the Southwest. The Institute of Directors, I was on the committee. They closed the branch. All these branches closed. This was all my trade networking.
Yeah.
They all closed, the whole lot, because branches became expensive to maintain.
Yeah.
But it gave me the contacts to kick me off. But I could have done much more had the branches remained, because that was day-to-day networking with people in my field. Then I was involved with 4N for quite a long time, and that, I think, was possibly where we first met. And then your networking group I went along to, and the rest is history.
Yeah, well, looking forward to hopefully getting those events going soon. We kind of parked it for obviously this year for what's been going.
Yeah.
But very much looking forward to catching up with everybody. Now, one of the things, obviously, getting to know you was knowing your experience in the drinks trade. I just want to obviously plug the magazine. It's our latest magazine for Taunton, but it's been wonderful as having your own page, Martin's.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely right. You see, I always keep copies of the magazine, which I take with me when I go out.
Oh, wonderful.
And I give them to people because I think it's a great magazine, Paul. And believe me, this wasn't planned. I've always got word gets around.
Yeah, well, we were very keen, obviously, to get you to share your experience and for people to discover more drinks, and obviously a big advocate for local food and drink suppliers in the area, and keen for people to be able to enjoy these drinks at home, which I guess is a good ending point to promote our show that we're going to be doing together, Martin's Drinks Club. So we're going to be enjoying some drinks from home, and you're going to tell us how to put them together, yeah?
Yes, I think the whole thing. Have I got time to make a point very quickly, Paul?
Yeah, of course.
Just generally about making cocktails at home, because I've thought about this very seriously, and I ask myself whether the trade, if I was running a top cocktail bar, whether I'd be bothered about people making drinks at home, because it's taking trade away from me as a professional barman. And that's not the case. A lot of barmen actually do consumer presentations as well. I relate this to food. Now, we both know Augustus, and many of our, I was going to say listeners, but they're actually watching the program. Many of our viewers will know all about Augustus. You can get a fantastic takeaway meal from Augustus. You can cook it at home, exactly the same quality of food as if you had it in the restaurant. And I get a lot of pleasure from that. And it's less expensive, so I'm not paying service charge and I'm buying my own wine. But it's not the same experience as having that same meal on their plate served by their people. And I say the same applies to cocktails. What I want people to do is, number one, drink cocktails at home because it's fun. It increases your variety dramatically, particularly in these days of lockdown. Much better than drinking the same whiskey every night. You're having something different. But it's the same as with food. If you have that identical cocktail made by a top bartender, it's not just the drink. It's the atmosphere of the bar. It's watching the professionalism of the bartender and everything else that goes with it. So I think I'm helping the trade as well as helping people in their own homes. I just want to make that point, because I don't want anybody thinking I'm taking business away from the trade. I don't think I am. I think it's quite the reverse.
No, absolutely. And I think lots of the bars that I've been to, there's some great cocktail bars, and you know, that you can go to. I've been to the Ritz with my wife, and we enjoyed the cocktail bar there, which was really good. So the whole experience that goes with it, and the vibe of the vibe of the room and things like that. I was going to ask you, what's your particular tipple, if you've got one?
I haven't got one. I used to say I had. I think as time goes on, I find it's a bit like people say, "What's your favourite wine?" And I say, "Well, it depends. It depends on a lot of factors." I like a number of cocktails which I go back to, because the great thing about what I'm doing is I try something different every day, and I force myself to try things I don't think I like and find actually I do, because that's the great thing. I, for many years, would have said my favourite cocktail was a Negroni, and it's still one of my favourite go-to cocktails. And if you ask most professional bartenders, their go-to cocktail, it's the Negroni. And it's partly because it's a magic drink, because it does taste really good. But it's also the fact it's so easy to make. You don't need shakers or mixers. You just do pour, 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 third of each ingredient, over ice, done. So a busy bartender at the end of the evening, if he just wants a drink, it's a great drink to have. And all it is gin, it's red vermouth and Campari. Simple as that. Now, the gin will vary and the vermouth will vary. The Campari should never vary. The moment you take the Campari out, it's no longer a Negroni. So you can't put Aperol in and call it a Negroni. It's a different drink. But that's probably my go-to cocktail. But I love this one, the Aviation. Amazing cocktail. And what I want to do when we do these sessions each week is to do a different cocktail each week, but it will be progressive. And I'll talk to you more about that separately. But my plan really is to take, it's not a course. I don't expect people to study books. I will mention a couple of books which are useful for reference, but basically you don't need to study up and pass an exam. But what I want to do is give people a feel for what they like in a cocktail and understand how to put the ingredients together so that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Because when you're talking about cooking, it's exactly the same. You change an ingredient in a dish and it's a different dish. And it's the same with cocktails. It's understanding what goes into it. Same logic as with wine and food pairing. You've got to think about what goes in and then make your own decisions ultimately about what you like and don't like. But you can't make those decisions until you have the basic product knowledge. So I'm going to do a bit of each.
Well, we really look forward to that. And like you said, with the hospitality industry, we're all very keen to support them and get back into the bars and enjoy and ask for drinks like cocktails that you've been able to try at home, that you can have the experience in the bar. So that's great.
Absolutely.
So looking forward to having some fun, looking forward to trying some different drinks. Thank you so much for your help over the years in the magazine and getting to know you as a good friend. And this year, so it's been particularly tough, particularly for people like yourself that have been at home. But it's been great to be able to catch up like this and in person when we've been able to. I just want to end on your final motto, Martin.
My final motto. That's a very good one. Are you talking about in a drink sense or are you talking about in a general sense?
Well, up to you.
Okay. Well, to quote Monty Python, always look on the bright side of life. There is always a bright side, however hard it is. And I'll say this as a closing remark because it affects us all at the moment with lockdown. How I survived the last 6 or so months and how I run my life now is that during the day I do admin work for a charity and it keeps my mind alive. And every evening I try and make a different cocktail, which is something else, something quite different. But the whole process keeps me going and it's something I can do at home. So find something you can do at home to replace those wonderful things that you would normally do outside. Yeah. So be positive. It will come out of this. This isn't going to last forever. It may not be the old normal. I think some things will change permanently, but you've got to keep positive.
Well, I'll raise my glass to that. I'm not going here, but hopefully see you soon. I really look forward to chatting with you on the Martin's Drinks Club, which starts this week. And every week from then on up to Christmas, we can enjoy some nice drinks, have some fun, and keep our spirits up.
And we are recording this, aren't we? So that people can go back to them afterwards. Because I've got viewers from around the globe. I've certainly got friends in Sri Lanka that want to watch this. I've got a friend in Melbourne, in Australia. Sometimes it might be the middle of the night for them, so they might want to watch the repeat. But they're all on Facebook, on YouTube.
Yeah, they'll be on YouTube and Facebook recorded, so we can upload them there, Martin. People can send in their comments, any questions. If they are watching live, they can ask questions then and there. But really looking forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, all the best.
All right, take care, Martin. Bye now. Bye. Bye.